Okay, Chapter 11, Decision Making and Relevant Information, Part 1. This is actually one of my favorite chapters because it integrates a lot of things throughout the book, and it's very applied. You know, you can see what it would be like at work. So we start out with another 5-step process, okay? 5-step decision-making process, and then we'll talk about relevant versus irrelevant information in decision situations, okay? And the important thing is not to ignore the irrelevant, because all it does is muck up what you're looking at. So you want to just look at information that makes a difference, okay? So that is what's relevant. And then explain the concept of opportunity cost and why managers should consider it when insourcing versus outsourcing decisions. Okay, so we'll look at whether or not to make or buy, make something inside, or maybe prepare payroll inside, or to do it on the outside. Then to know how to choose which products to produce when there are capacity constraints. Okay, how to manage bottlenecks. Discuss factors that managers must learn when adding or dropping customers or business units. Okay, and in a lot of these, everything is about fixed cost. You've got the fixed cost whether or not you keep the business unit, so that's what the decision really is. And explain why the book value of equipment is irrelevant to managers in making equipment replacement decisions. And finally, we'll talk about how conflicts can arise between the decision model a manager uses and the performance evaluation model the top management uses to evaluate managers. Okay, and that's the interesting part there. So we start out with information in the decision process, and managers usually follow a decision model among various courses of action. And it's a formal method of making a choice that often involves both quantitative and qualitative information. And management accountants analyze and present relevant data, and managers use that 5-step process. But what this really speaks to is that at work, you'll have a formal process for all of these decisions. Okay, generally they involve spending a lot of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe millions of dollars, and you're competing with other people's ideas. So there's a very formalized process that you go through to present an idea. And here's the 5-step decision-making process. Identify the problem, obtain information, predict the future, make decisions by choosing among alternatives, and then implement, evaluate, and learn. Okay? So it's you've got an idea because you know what's going on in your business. Get more information about it, and then make predictions about the future is really a giant financial analysis, and it could include qualitative information also. And it's part of all the data that's needed to make a decision, because there'll be many good alternatives here, and you can't do everything. So the concept of relevance, what's important to remember about this is if it's relevant, it occurs in the future, and it's different between different courses of action. You could tell me that you spent $1 million yesterday on this idea, and you know what? It's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. Okay? We only look forward. So relevant costs are expected future costs, and relevant revenues are expected future revenues. Historical costs are never relevant, and they're also called sunk costs. And sometimes they look really attractive, and they look like something that you want to consider in a decision, but you don't want to, okay? If it's in the past, it just doesn't matter because you can't change it. Now, managers divide the outcomes of decisions into 2 broad categories, quantitative and qualitative. Okay, and quantitative factors are outcomes that we can measure in numerical terms, and that's the kind of work that we do. But qualitative factors are also really important, and they're difficult to measure accurately in numerical terms, like satisfaction. We might attach like a high, medium, low, some kind of a value to it, but they're ordinal numbers. And can't really make decisions with that, but it's just more information about your decision. Okay, so although quantitative and non-financial factors and qualitative factors are difficult to measure in financial terms, they're important for managers to consider. Okay, even though you can't, they're hard to measure, but you're always looking for something that you can measure. Something, the more objective it is, the better it is. Now this is a good slide. It's an illustration of how relevant costs and revenues are selected in an analysis. In this example, we're deciding whether or not to reorganize. Okay, so we've got two different alternatives here. Don't reorganize or reorganize. The costs and revenues associated with each decision are presented in the first two columns, which show a difference of $70,000 in operating income. But when you look at it, you've got to go line by line. You can see there's a difference here in labor. There's some reorganization costs here, but the numbers are different. But you don't really know where the 70,000 is. I mean, you've got to look real. Oh, here's some more in manufacturing labor in here, huh? But you have to look hard, okay? The third and fourth columns present only those which are relevant, and that's just manufacturing labor and the reorganization costs. And this difference is the same $70,000 difference, but it's just easier to identify. Okay, and there's the detail down below. And it's helpful to focus on the relevant data only, especially since sometimes all the information needed to present a full income statement for each alternative is not available. Okay, so sometimes you have limited information and you can just focus on what's different between the two. Now, sunk costs that have already occurred and they cannot be changed. Okay, so these are sunk costs. They are excluded because they cannot be changed by any future action. So we've got a few terms before we take a look at decision making. The first one is incremental cost, the additional total cost incurred for an activity. Okay, that would be the incremental cost. Differential cost is the difference in total cost between two alternatives. Okay, at least this is how your textbook is going to use it. Incremental revenue is the additional total revenue from an activity. And then differential revenue is the difference in total revenue between two alternatives. So now we'll take a look at the decisions and then that have to be made. Then we'll go through them individually, and the problems that we work together will be important to teasing out what's important about these issues. So the types of decisions we've got special orders. Okay, so the police come and they want you to build a special bicycle for them or something like that and put a sticker on it. Are you going to charge them the same amount as you would your regular customers? Or because they're buying 45 of them, are you going to make them a deal? Okay, short run pricing decisions. Okay, short run as opposed to long run. And then outsourcing versus insourcing. And these are make or buy decisions. Do I make it myself or do I have it done on the outside? And what do I have to pay attention to with these decisions? We'll look at outsourcing and idle facilities, strategic and qualitative factors, international outsourcing, total alternatives approach, opportunity cost approach, and the carrying costs of inventory. Okay, so in this chapter, we'll cover the decisions on these three slides and later in chapters, and we'll review the decisions about joint costs, quality and timeliness, inventory management, capital investments, and transfer pricing. Now, product mix decisions are another type of decision managers make in conjunction with capacity constraints. Okay, and these are decisions that managers make about which products to sell and in what quantities. And they usually only have a short run focus because they typically arise in the context of capacity constraints that can be relaxed in the long run. Now, many decisions are required regarding bottlenecks. A bottleneck is a phenomenon where the performance or capacity of an entire system is limited by a single or a limited number of components or resources. So we use the theory of constraints, and that describes methods to maximize operating income when faced with some bottlenecks and some bottleneck operations. And to implement the theory of constraints, we use three measures. We use throughput margin, investment will equal the sum of materials, R&D costs, and capital costs of equipment and buildings, and finally operating costs, and that equals the cost of operations, okay, other than direct materials. And customer profitability and relevant costs. These are some additional decisions that managers regularly make. They make decisions about adding or dropping a product line, but if the cost object is a customer, managers have to decide about adding or dropping customers. Okay, a branch or segment to add or discontinue it, and then equipment replacement. Okay, so we'll look at all these.